The CEO didn't know the four men approaching her weren't guests until one pulled a blade. The janitor did. And what he did next would change her life forever. The lights were still dimmed from the keynote toast when the chaos began. Everyone assumed the men in gray suits were late investors, not intruders. They moved with purpose, straight through the outer ring of event security, past the glass doors, and onto the executive floor, where the CEO was finishing her gala speech. They didn't raise voices, didn't cause a scene, not at first. Then one of them dropped a briefcase, and another drew a blade. A second later, the crowd scattered. Celeste Vaughn, CEO of Steel Biotech, stood frozen behind the podium, blinking at the red laser sights now dancing across the crystal awards on the table beside her. She took one step back, then another. Her heel snapped violently against the marble tile. She hit the ground hard. People screamed. Glass shattered. Someone dove for the alarm and missed. The four men moved with brutal coordination. One cornered Celeste. Another blocked the stairwell. A third barked commands no one understood, except one person watching silently from behind a utility cart. The janitor? He'd been pushing his mop bucket through the hallway when the gala started. No one noticed him then. Most of them never did. But he noticed everything. His name was Jack. He didn't flinch when the first attacker reached for Celeste. Didn't panic when the second one drew a stun baton. He just stepped forward into the chaos and let the mop slide down, handle first, into his hand, like it belonged there. The first attacker never saw it coming. The mop handle slammed into his sternum with a dull crack. The second man lunged and was swept off his feet by a fast, low pivot that sent him crashing into the wall. Jack caught the third man's baton mid-swing and drove it backward into his ribs. 3 down. No wasted movement. The fourth attacker hesitated. Jack didn't, and Celeste, her dress torn, blood running from her arm, could only stare up from the floor. This wasn't self-defense, it was precision. It was practiced. It was something she'd seen before, but never expected from a janitor. She didn't know who he really was. Not yet. 8 hours earlier, the same hallway was silent. No screams, no blood, just the steady squeak-swish of a mop gliding over the polished marble. Jack moved like he always did, methodical, invisible. He'd been on the 47th floor since 5 a.m., wiping coffee rings off conference tables, replacing sanitizer bottles outside bathrooms, and removing fingerprints from doors that locked behind million-dollar decisions. No one spoke to him, not unless something was broken. He liked it that way, until the elevator chimed. Celeste Vaughn stepped out in full power armor, heels sharp enough to puncture tires, black blazer tailored like it was cut from money itself, and that subtle, dismissive glance she always gave anyone not wearing a lanyard with an executive title. 2 men followed, junior VPs carrying digital folders, practicing fake laughs. They turned the corner and nearly collided with Jack's mop bucket. Celeste stopped short. Her heel caught on a damp patch of tile he hadn't reached yet. She didn't fall, but the sharp gasp she made was enough to stop everyone around her. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, staring at him like he'd personally insulted her shoes. Jack stepped back instantly. "Apologies, ma'am. Do you not understand how optics work?" she snapped, cutting him off. "This is the executive floor. Investors will be here in 30 minutes, and you're mopping?" Jack nodded once. "It's part of the rotation." Scheduled cleaning. Oh, wonderful. Scheduled contamination. She turned to the junior VPS. "Get PR on the line. I swear if even one camera sees a janitor in the background while I'm talking about biotech breakthroughs, we're trending for the wrong reasons." One of them muttered something about rerouting. Jack remained still, hands behind his back, eyes lowered. Not in shame, but calculation. He'd stood in front of generals who barked louder than her, but generals, at least, had earned their stripes. "You," she added, pointing a manicured nail at him, "down to the basement. I don't want to see you up here until after the gala, understood?" He gave a slow nod. No argument, no glare, just quiet retreat. As he pushed his cart toward the service elevator, he reached into his pocket, not for his phone, not for a key, but for the small, worn hospital wristband he kept folded in a leather sleeve. The name on it read, Noah Rowan, age 9, congenital heart condition. It was why he showed up every day, why he kept this job, why he swallowed pride like medicine. Not for the paycheck, for the coverage. He pressed the elevator button. Behind him, her voice echoed once more. Honestly, what kind of man chooses to clean up after people who change the world? Jack didn't answer. But later that night, he would. The rooftop terrace had been transformed for the gala. Gold-trimmed cocktail tables lined the edge of the skyline. Soft jazz floated beneath the city's noise. Guests in tailored tuxedos and shimmering gowns moved in curated circles. Tech investors, pharmaceutical lobbyists, private security contractors. And at the center of it all, like a queen among diplomats, stood Celeste Vaughn. Not a hair out of place. Not a single emotion on her face that she hadn't rehearsed. She gave interviews like sermons and smiled like it cost her nothing. And to most people in the room, she was the reason they were here. The biotech visionary, the patent-wielding, investor-winning, government-advised CEO of Steele Biotech, the woman whose company claimed it would cure heart failure before the decade ends. Except curing people wasn't what she talked about tonight. "We don't just fix what's broken," she said into the microphone, standing beneath the soft blue uplights. "We build what's better, stronger, smarter, more controlled." The crowd applauded, eyes gleaming with returns on investment. Jack watched from the security feed downstairs, not out of interest, but necessity. He needed to know when the crowd would thin out so he could finish mopping the 47th floor without running into her again. She'd made it clear that even his presence was a liability. On screen, she smiled. But in private, she wielded her words like scalpels. Just this morning, she'd told HR that janitorial rotation near the executive wing should be restructured to avoid optics conflicts. She hadn't said Jack's name. She didn't need to. She'd seen the hospital band on his keychain when it dropped near her stilettos earlier. She'd looked down at it like it was litter. That part stung more than the insult, not because it was cruel, but because it was calculated. Celeste never yelled, never cussed, never lowered herself to rage. Her power came from the quiet erasure of people like Jack. Remove, replace, restructure. With a single email, she could push him to night shift, strip his benefits, cut him off from the reason he tolerated every sneer. And she almost had. If tonight had gone how she planned, Jack would have been off the floor, invisible, forgettable. Instead, she'd end the night at his feet, staring up at the man she thought she'd stepped over. The rooftop terrace had been transformed for the gala. Gold-trimmed cocktail tables lined the edge of the skyline. Soft jazz floated beneath the city's noise. Guests in tailored tuxedos and shimmering gowns moved in curated circles. Tech investors, pharmaceutical lobbyists, private security contractors. And at the center of it all, like a queen among diplomats, stood Celeste Vaughn. Not a hair out of place. Not a single emotion on her face that she hadn't rehearsed. She gave interviews like sermons and smiled like it cost her nothing. And to most people in the room, she was the reason they were here. The biotech visionary, the patent-wielding, investor-winning, government-advised CEO of Steele Biotech, the woman whose company claimed it would cure heart failure before the decade ends. Except curing people wasn't what she talked about tonight. "We don't just fix what's broken," she said into the microphone, standing beneath the soft blue uplights. "We build what's better. Stronger, smarter, more controlled." The crowd applauded, eyes gleaming with returns on investment. Jack watched from the security feed downstairs, not out of interest, but necessity. He needed to know when the crowd would thin out so he could finish mopping the 47th floor without running into her again. She'd made it clear that even his presence was a liability. On screen, she smiled, but in private, she wielded her words like scalpels. Just this morning, she'd told HR that janitorial rotation near the executive wing should be restructured to avoid optics conflicts. She hadn't said Jack's name. She didn't need to. She'd seen the hospital band on his keychain when it dropped near her stilettos earlier. She'd looked down at it like it was litter. That part stung more than the insult. Not because it was cruel, but because it was calculated. Celeste never yelled, never cussed, never lowered herself to rage. Her power came from the quiet erasure of people like Jack. Remove, replace, restructure. With a single email, she could push him to night shift, strip his benefits, cut him off from the reason he tolerated every sneer. And she almost had. If tonight had gone how she planned, Jack would have been off the floor. Invisible. Forgettable. Instead, she'd end the night at his feet, staring up at the man she thought she'd stepped over. The apartment was small. 2 rooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen with peeling cabinets and a stubborn stove. Jack kept it clean, not out of pride, but precision. He'd lived in too many barracks, too many field units to let chaos creep in. But nothing in his old life trained him for mornings with Noah. "Toast triangle or square?" Jack asked softly, kneeling beside his son's chair. Noah didn't answer right away. His hands were pressed flat against the table, eyes fixed on a spinning blue fidget disc. Jack waited. He knew not to rush. "Triangle," Noah finally whispered. Jack nodded, moved to the counter, and began to cut without a word. His son was 9, bright, gentle, obsessed with space shuttles and perfectly aligned colors. He hadn't spoken until he was 5. Doctors said his autism came with sensory processing disorder and a rare heart condition, congenital, aggressive, expensive. Every decision Jack made now was filtered through one question. Will this protect Noah? He'd once commanded squads through hostile zones. Could disarm a man in under 4 seconds. But now he made lunchboxes and memorized therapy appointments and picked up extra shifts so Noah could get a new heart scan every 6 weeks. He slipped the keychain out of his pocket while the toaster buzzed. It was worn, leather-wrapped, stitched unevenly. Inside was a folded plastic wristband, faded white, with his son's name in red block letters, Noah Rowan, Cardiac Care, Level 3. That band had stayed with him through 5 jobs, 4 hospitals, 2 surgeries. It was his grounding tether. His reminder that dignity was not weakness, that swallowing pride was sometimes the bravest act a man could do. "Can I bring the blue one today?" Noah asked, pointing to the disc. Jack smiled. "Sure." He zipped it into the side pocket of his backpack, kissed the top of his head, and pulled on his work boots. They were the same ones he'd worn in the army, just cleaned now, the soles repaired twice. Before he left, he checked the fridge. 3 days of meds chilled and labeled. He left a sticky note for the therapist, set the window lock, and turned back once at the door. Noah was still at the table, lining up toast crumbs into constellations. The world might see Jack as a janitor, might laugh at his silence or spit on his uniform, but this small boy in the kitchen didn't care about suits, boardrooms, or biotech IPOS. He cared that his dad came home, that he was safe. And that was all the reason Jack needed to keep his head down, until someone gave him a reason to lift it. They arrived just before sunset. 4 men in tailored suits, each carrying a black leather briefcase and a forged clearance badge. Nothing about them stood out, by design. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, short haircuts. They looked like they belonged at a biotech gala. And for the first 30 minutes, everyone assumed they did. No one questioned the way they bypassed the metal detectors. No one noticed the slight bulge beneath one man's jacket, or how the tallest of them scanned each hallway like he was memorizing escape routes. Security was stretched thin for the event. Extra eyes had been moved to the lobby, where press and VIPs arrived in waves. That's what the 4 were counting on. Their names didn't match the guest list because they weren't on it. They weren't investors, collaborators, or journalists. They were former employees of an overseas tech firm ruined by a patent war Steel Biotech had quietly won. Lawsuits were buried, settlements paid, but revenge isn't always logical. Sometimes it's surgical. One of them, gray-beard, hollow eyes, carried a device in his briefcase designed to tap into Steel's biometric vault. Not to steal data, but to destroy it. All they needed was access to the main executive floor and one piece of intel they didn't yet have: Celeste Vaughn's personal retina scan, which meant they needed her alive, at least for a little while. The shortest of them checked his watch. Elevator in 10. The tallest nodded. No shooting unless cornered. In and out. Shame. The third one grinned. I was hoping she'd scream. They reached the elevators just as the gala was peaking above. Guests were distracted. Security staff were glued to the floor manager's headset about an electrical issue in the West Wing. Perfect timing. They split into pairs and stepped inside the lift, flashing copied keycards at the scanner. It blinked green. The doors slid shut. They ascended in silence. Floor 47, the executive floor. Upstairs, Celeste raised a champagne glass to a table of donors, utterly unaware that her evening and her power was about to be shattered. And just down the hall, out of uniform and rinsing out a bucket, Jack Rowan heard the soft ding of the elevator. He didn't know who they were yet, but something in his spine stiffened. Floor 47 was too quiet. Jack noticed it as soon as he stepped out of the service stairwell. The gala's music didn't reach this. Far most guests were still on the terrace above. Only a few scattered executives remained here, preparing documents or sneaking in phone calls between drinks. He had intended to finish wiping the glass along the east corridor, then disappear. That was the plan. But plans change fast when instincts scream louder than footsteps. The elevator dinged behind him. Jack didn't turn around immediately. He waited, watching the glass in the hallway reflection. 4 men exited the elevator, suits, confident stride. No hesitation, but no badges. And one of them, tall, lean, was scanning the hallway like a wolf in a cage. Jack's eyes narrowed. They turned left, toward the boardroom. Jack turned right toward the janitor closet, calm, measured. But inside his chest, something shifted gears. His breath slowed. Hands loosened. He reached for the mop. Not to clean, to test the weight. Across the floor, Celeste was wrapping up her conversation with 2 visiting investors when the men arrived. "Ms. Vaughn?" the tall one asked, polite as ice. She blinked. "Yes? We need a moment of your time." Discreetly, security wasn't in sight. The intern who handled room coordination was in the restroom. No one noticed the way the tall man's hand hovered near his jacket until it moved too fast. A blade. A long, curved one. Not for stabbing, but cutting. Celeste's glass fell from her hand. It shattered at her feet just as the second man grabbed her by the wrist and dragged her toward the vault corridor. A scream caught in her throat, not from pain but from understanding. This wasn't theft. It was personal. Jack heard the scream just as his hand closed around the mop handle. He didn't think. He didn't plan. His boots moved before the rest of him did, as if some buried part of him had been waiting for permission. He moved like a shadow down the service corridor, turned the corner, and saw her. Celeste Vaughn, face pale, arm bloodied from broken glass, being pulled across her own company's seal on the marble floor. 4 men, 1 janitor, and 30 feet of polished silence between them. The 4th man saw Jack too late. His blade was already half drawn when the mop struck him in the chest, not the soft cotton end, but the polished wood handle. It landed like a hammer, collapsing his stance and forcing a wheeze from his lungs. Before he could recover, Jack twisted the shaft, yanked the man's wrist down, and sent the weapon skittering across the marble floor. The first attacker turned just in time to catch the mop head square in the face. It wasn't soft, it was industrial grade, soaked and tightly wound, heavy enough to knock him sideways into the conference room glass. The second lunged with a baton. Jack caught the movement in his periphery. He ducked low, swept the man's legs with the mop handle, and used the spin to pivot into a rising elbow that cracked into the attacker's jaw with surgical precision. 1 down, 2 down, 3 gasping. Only 1 still standing, and he was backing away now, wide-eyed, holding his hands out like he'd seen a ghost. Jack didn't chase. He advanced with calm steps, each one echoing like judgment. The 4th man panicked, swung high with a panic punch, and exposed his ribs. Jack slipped under the swing and drove his shoulder into the man's center mass. The attacker hit the floor hard. Jack straddled him, disarmed him of the baton, and pressed the mop handle to his throat, not with rage, but control. "Done," Jack said quietly. Behind him, glass crunched. Celeste Vaughn sat against the wall, one hand pressed to a shallow cut across her ribs, her breathing sharp and ragged. The other hand clutched her phone. Though she hadn't dialed anyone, she was watching. Everyone else was hiding, crouched behind tables, frozen behind reception desks. Security wasn't even on the floor yet, just her and him. For several long seconds, no one moved. Jack stood slowly, straightened his back, and looked down at the wreckage around him. 4 grown men groaning or unconscious at his feet. He picked up the mop, now cracked near the base, and leaned it against the wall like it was nothing more than a tool again. Celeste still hadn't spoken, but her expression said everything: confusion, recognition, and something close to fear. Because in that moment she realized this wasn't luck, this was training, and her janitor wasn't who she thought he was. The alarms had stopped, the lights hadn't. Red strobes continued to pulse along the executive floor, casting long shadows over the wreckage. 4 attackers moaning in pain, shards of broken glass sparkling like confetti across the tile, and a mop lying still against the far wall. No one moved. No one spoke. Celeste Vaughn sat where she had fallen, back against the marble panel, her designer gown torn at the hem, streaked with blood from a shallow gash on her forearm. She wasn't shaking. Not yet. Her body hadn't caught up to what her mind had just witnessed, and that, more than anything, unsettled her. Jack stood in the center of it all, calm, breathing steady. His eyes scanned the floor like a man checking his perimeter. Not a janitor assessing a mess, but a soldier calculating aftershock. It was the silence that did it. Silence after chaos tells you who's still standing and who matters now. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Security, finally. 2 men in black polos entered at a sprint, then froze at the scene. Their hands hovered near holsters, uncertain who the threat was. One of them stepped toward Jack. Jack raised both hands, slowly. "She's safe," he said simply. "Scene's clear." It wasn't until that moment Celeste realized the truth. He wasn't breathless, wasn't injured. He wasn't surprised by what had happened. which meant this wasn't improvisation. It was experience. The head of security arrived next, flanked by building managers and a legal advisor. The boardroom doors creaked open, dozens of high-level staff and gala guests peeking out, whispering. They'd heard it all. Some had filmed it. Celeste pushed herself up with trembling hands. She opened her mouth to speak, an order, a thank you, something. But the words evaporated as she looked at Jack. Not at his uniform, not the cracked mop handle, but at his eyes. Still steady, still silent, and suddenly, painfully, familiar. She'd once seen a look like that at a defense contractor expo, an escort detail from a government agency no one had clearance to name. They didn't talk either. But they didn't have to, because everyone around them already knew who they were. Now she looked at Jack and realized she didn't know anything at all. The footage didn't make sense. 3 angles, 2 executive hallway feeds, 1 grainy security cam from the far end of the floor. All told the same story. A janitor with no combat gear, no weapons, no backup, systematically taking down 4 armed men in under 25 seconds. No hesitation, no misstep, just brutal, exact violence. The head of corporate security, Marcus Hale, rewound the clip for the 3rd time. He'd served in private protection for 20 years, knew what real training looked like. This was beyond trained. This was programmed. He opened Jack Rowan's employee file. Hired 18 months ago. Position, facilities maintenance, night rotation. Background check, clean. Former military, DD-214 attached. Branch, Army, role, logistics specialist. That was the red flag. Nobody who moves like that was logistics. Marcus picked up the phone. The call wasn't official, not in writing, just a quiet ring to a contact in D.C., someone who owed him a favor. I've got a man here. Janitor, Rowan, Jack. Army file says logistics, but he just dismantled 4 men like a Tier 1 operator. You ever hear that name? There was a long pause on the line. Then, you didn't see anything. And neither did your cameras. What? Rowan's file is sealed. His last known assignment was off books. Ghost protocols. 0 civilian crossover. You're lucky he left the walls standing. Marcus lowered the phone. In the hallway outside the server room, Celeste Vaughn was waiting. He stepped out, closing the folder behind him. Well? She asked. What did you find? Marcus stared at her for a moment, then shook his head. You don't want to know. Her jaw clenched. I'm not in the mood for games. It's not a game, he replied. It's protection. For who? For us. She fell silent. He placed the file back on the desk, top page turned just enough to show Jack's listed emergency contact. No spouse, no siblings, just one name. Noah Rowan. Dependent. Age 9. Celeste stared at it for a long time. And for the first time in her career, she felt something unfamiliar, gratitude wrapped in fear. The next morning, the executive floor was empty, scrubbed clean. The only thing left from the previous night was a long hairline crack in the marble near the boardroom entrance. Jack stood beside it, mop in hand, eyes steady. He wasn't scheduled to work that morning, but he came anyway. Routine mattered. Not just to him, but to Noah. Footsteps echoed behind him. Celeste Vaughn, no security detail, no entourage, just her. Sharp heels, gray trench coat, a fresh bandage across her forearm. She stopped a few feet away and didn't speak at first. I had your badge access reinstated, she said, voice lower than usual. Full executive clearance. Jack didn't answer. I also approved a benefits extension, Tier 1 coverage for dependents, and discretionary hazard compensation. Significant? Still he didn't speak. She folded her arms, not defensively, but because she didn't know what else to do with them. You saved my life. Jack nodded once. Yes? I misjudged you. Another nod. I'd like to offer you a new role, head of internal protection, quiet, off record, full clearance. You'd report only to me. Jack looked at her, not with disdain, not with triumph, just calm. No, he said. She blinked. I'm not here for that, he continued. I'm here for the coverage, for my son. A silence passed between them, heavy but not hostile. You're turning down 6 figures. Jack glanced at the mop, then at the polished floor. I already got what I came for. Then he walked away. She didn't stop him, because deep down she knew this wasn't his revenge. This was his boundary, and he had drawn it clean. The boardroom hallway was spotless by noon. Jack's mop moved in practiced lines, corner to corner, wall to wall, no shortcuts. Not because anyone would notice, but because he would. He paused near the door where Celeste had bled the night before. The light still flickered from the impact damage. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon and bleach. He pulled the mop upright and leaned it against the wall, bristles down, handle pointing skyward. A janitor's flag. A soldier's marker. A quiet line in the sand. No cameras, no audience. Just the man and his work. He stepped back, took one last look, and turned toward the elevators. As he walked, he pulled out the worn leather keychain again, rubbed his thumb across the faded wristband inside. Noah Rowan, cardiac care, level 3. Jack smiled, just barely. The floor was clean. The message delivered. The job done. And more importantly, his son was safe. A week later, Celeste stood at the head of the boardroom table, flanked by her executive team, PR staff, and a few visibly nervous shareholders. She didn't open with slides, no branding, no taglines, just a story. Some of you were here last week, she said. Some of you watched the footage. Most of you still don't believe what you saw. She let the silence settle. There was a moment, she continued, when I thought I was going to die. I was bleeding, cornered, and surrounded by men who had everything planned, every detail, every route. She paused. But they missed one. The boardroom was silent. They didn't plan for the janitor. Someone coughed. Another shifted in their seat. And neither did I, she added. I don't know everything about his past. I'm not supposed to. What I do know is this. He saved my life. And the way I used to look at people like him, that ends now. She turned off the mic. Across the city, Jack sat beside Noah, watching him draw on a tablet. The boy was smiling, breathing easy. A new medication trial, approved under Steele Biotech's emergency grant fund, was finally helping. Jack didn't need recognition. He didn't want status. He just wanted moments like this, and he had them now. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and let the world keep spinning without needing to fight it. He was home.